I'm James, 32, proud owner of a historic four-story brownstone in Boston that my grandfather left specifically to me. My architectural career keeps me traveling globally, designing luxury homes for high-profile clients. Last Sunday, I returned home excited for our traditional family dinner, something I always look forward to despite my hectic schedule. The moment I walked in, something felt off. My siblings were exchanging strange glances, and the seating arrangement seemed deliberately planned. After dessert, my mother tapped her glass and made an announcement that shook me to my core. Each sibling gets a floor. Before I tell you how my legal team saved my home, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to see how I protected what was rightfully mine. Growing up in a close-knit family, our Sunday dinners were sacred. My grandfather, William Harrison, was a respected real estate developer who built our family legacy brick by brick. He had an exceptional eye for historic properties with potential, and the brownstone he left me was his masterpiece. Located in Beacon Hill, the four-story building dates back to the 1870s, with original hardwood floors, hand-carved moldings, and stained glass windows that filter sunlight into kaleidoscopic patterns across the rooms. Current market value, just shy of $4 million. My grandfather and I shared a special bond over architecture. While my siblings showed little interest in his work, I would spend weekends following him around construction sites from the age of 8, absorbing everything he taught me. We would sit for hours in his study, poring over blueprints and discussing the merits of different architectural styles. It came as no surprise to anyone when I pursued architecture as my career. What did surprise my siblings was when Grandpa's will specified that the brownstone would pass solely to me upon his death. He would have wanted it preserved and appreciated, his lawyer explained during the reading of the will. James is the only one who truly understands its historical significance and architectural value. The statement was met with tight smiles and nods from my family, but looking back, I should have noticed the resentment brewing beneath the surface. My older brother Thomas, 39, has always chased business opportunities with more enthusiasm than success. He's jumped from venture to venture, from restaurant franchises to tech startups, accumulating debt along the way. His wife, Stephanie, constantly pressures him to keep up with the Joneses despite their financial reality. My younger sister Amanda, 29, chose teaching as a profession. She married her college sweetheart, Kyle, and they already have 3 children under the age of 7, with a 4th on the way. They've been renting a 2-bedroom apartment that's becoming increasingly cramped with their growing family. Then there's my youngest sibling, Darren, 26, who's been in college for what seems like forever, changing majors annually, and taking minimal credit hours while enjoying an active social life funded by our mother's generosity. As for me, my career took off after winning a prestigious design competition 5 years ago. Now I travel between New York, London, Dubai, and Singapore, designing custom homes for wealthy clients who value my blend of historical appreciation and modern functionality. My schedule means I'm rarely in Boston for more than a week at a time, which has become a point of contention with my family. What's the point of having that beautiful house if you're never in it? My mother would ask during our weekly phone calls. I always brushed off these comments, explaining that my career was in a critical growth phase. I never imagined these observations were forming the foundation of a plan against me. Grandpa passed away just over a year ago. While we all mourned him deeply, life continued its forward march. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in creating spaces that would have made him proud. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, the dynamics within my family were shifting. The tradition of Sunday dinner continued, hosted at the brownstone even in my absence, with my mother using the spare key I'd given her for emergencies. I made a point to attend whenever I was in town, valuing these connections to my family and childhood. That fateful Sunday had seemed ordinary at first. I'd just returned from a 2-week trip to San Francisco where I'd been finalizing designs for a tech mogul's cliffside home. Pulling up to the brownstone, the first oddity I noticed was the parking arrangement. Normally, we parked randomly in the driveway and adjacent street spots, but today I found small signs marking spaces: Thomas and family, Amanda and family, Darren, and a narrow spot at the very end, labeled James. Puzzled but not overly concerned, I parked in my spot and made my way to the front door. The spring evening was pleasant, with the last of the cherry blossoms drifting down from the trees lining our street. I should have been relaxed, happy to be home, but an unexplainable tension had settled between my shoulder blades. Opening the front door, the smell of my mother's pot roast welcomed me, along with the sound of voices from the dining room. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, unaware that I was walking into an ambush, orchestrated by the people I trusted most in the world. The dining room fell silent as I entered. My family was already seated, which was unusual since dinner typically didn't start until everyone arrived. More striking was the seating arrangement. My mother sat at the head of the table, a position always reserved for me as the homeowner when I was present. Thomas sat to her right in my usual chair, with Stephanie beside him. Amanda, Kyle, and their children were arranged on the opposite side, while Darren lounged at the far end, scrolling through his phone. "James, you're right on time," my mother said with a brightness that didn't reach her eyes. She gestured to the only empty chair, tucked awkwardly in the corner. "We've saved you a seat." "Thanks, but I usually sit at the head of the table," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom wanted to discuss some family business today, so she's taking the lead." I conceded with a nod and took the assigned seat, noticing how my siblings avoided direct eye contact. The conversation during dinner was strained, revolving around superficial topics. Thomas talked about a new business opportunity that sounded suspiciously vague. Amanda complained about their cramped apartment and how the children needed space to grow. Darren mentioned his plans to finally graduate next year, though he'd been saying that for the past 3 years. My mother served her signature pot roast with glazed carrots and mashed potatoes, but I barely tasted it. Something in the air felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. When she brought out apple pie for dessert, my favorite, alarm bells really started ringing. After serving everyone dessert, my mother tapped her water glass with a spoon. The crystal-clear ring silenced all conversation. "I've been thinking about this house," she began, folding her hands on the table. "It's too big for just James. He's barely here, and all that space goes to waste." She paused, looking around the table with a satisfied expression. "I've decided that each sibling gets a floor." The silence that followed wasn't one of shock, at least not from my siblings. Their reactions seemed rehearsed, as though they'd practiced looking surprised. "Really?" Thomas asked with unconvincing disbelief. "That would solve so many problems for us." "I've already chosen the main floor," he continued, dropping all pretense of surprise. "The kitchen and living areas make sense for us since Stephanie loves to entertain." "I'd like the second floor," Amanda chimed in eagerly. "The bedrooms up there would be perfect for the kids. Each child could finally have their own room." "And I'll take the third floor with the entertainment room and library," Darren added, finally looking up from his phone with interest. "The acoustics in that media room are killer for my gaming sessions." My mother turned to me with what she probably thought was a generous smile. "You can keep the top floor with your office and the guest bedroom, James. Since you travel so much, you really just need a place to sleep when you're in town." I sat frozen, fork suspended midway to my mouth, apple pie forgotten. The audacity of what was happening struck me like a physical blow. My home, my legally owned property, was being divided up without my input or consent. "This house belongs to me," I said carefully, setting down my fork. "Grandpa left it specifically to me in his will." My mother waved away my words. "Family shares, James. You're being selfish, hoarding all this space when your brother and sister have real needs." "Thomas needs a professional space to finally launch a successful business," Stephanie interjected. "Your grandfather would have wanted to see the family legacy continue through entrepreneurship, and my children deserve rooms of their own," Amanda added, her husband nodding vigorously beside her. "They're William's great-grandchildren, after all. Plus, you're like..." "Never even here," Darren shrugged. "What's the point of having this massive place if it sits empty most of the year?" I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They genuinely believed they had the right to claim my property, as if my ownership was a technicality that could be overridden by family obligation. "This isn't how property ownership works," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "The brownstone is legally mine. Grandpa left it to me for specific reasons. I can't just divide it up because you all want a piece. Don't be so dramatic, my mother said dismissively. We're not asking you to give it up entirely. You'll still have the top floor, and we'll all contribute to utilities and maintenance, Thomas added, pulling out a folder. I've drafted a family property agreement that outlines everyone's responsibilities. The fact that he had paperwork prepared confirmed this wasn't a spontaneous idea, but a coordinated plan. My heart pounded as anger and betrayal warred within me. I need to use the bathroom, I said abruptly, standing up. Excuse me for a moment. Instead of heading to the bathroom, I quietly made my way to my home office on the top floor. I needed to check my property documents and gather my thoughts away from their pressuring presence. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Thomas whisper, "Give him time. He'll see this is for the best." Their confidence made my blood run cold. What else had they planned behind my back? Reaching the third floor, I noticed something odd immediately. The door to the entertainment room was slightly ajar, which was unusual because I always kept it closed and locked when away. Pushing it open, I was shocked to find several of Darren's gaming posters leaning against the wall and a box of his electronics sitting beside the media console. My pace quickened as I headed toward my office on the top floor. When I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. The lock had been changed. A cold fury swept through me as I retrieved the emergency key hidden in a hollowed-out book in the hallway shelf, thankful they hadn't discovered this backup. Inside my office, everything appeared untouched at first glance, but as I moved toward my desk, I spotted floor plans spread across a side table that hadn't been there when I left. Picking them up, I saw they were blueprints of my home, with room divisions marked in different colors, labeled with my siblings' names. Thomas had written home office and client meeting space on the main floor plans. Amanda had designated bedrooms for each of her children on the second floor, with notes about wall colors and furniture placement. Darren had transformed the third floor into what he called the ultimate bachelor pad, with areas for gaming tournaments and what he'd labeled a weekend crash pad for the boys. A notation at the bottom of the plans made my blood freeze. Renovation begins June 1st, less than 3 weeks away. As I stood there, processing this betrayal, the sound of voices drifted up through the heating vent near the floor, a quirk of the old house's construction that had allowed me to eavesdrop on my siblings' conversations as a child. "Do you think he suspects we've been planning this for months?" Amanda's voice came through clearly. "No way," Thomas replied. "He's too wrapped up in his fancy international projects to notice what's happening right under his nose. I've been moving small items in gradually for weeks. I still don't understand why we're pretending to ask permission when Mom says the house should have been split equally among all of us anyway," Darren complained. "Because we need him to sign the agreement willingly," Thomas explained with exasperation. "It'll be much cleaner legally. If he fights it, Mom's prepared to claim that Dad always intended for the house to benefit all of us, and that Grandpa was manipulated into changing his will. Which isn't far from the truth," my mother's voice chimed in. "Your grandfather always had a soft spot for James. He wasn't thinking clearly in his final years." "I need this to work out," Thomas continued, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "The bank's about to foreclose on our house, and Stephanie doesn't know how bad things really are. If I can use this place for business meetings, I might finally land some real clients. And we've already told the kids about their new rooms," Amanda added. "Ellie's so excited about the bay window where she can read. Kyle's already looking at schools in this district. I've told everyone about our new place," Darren laughed. "Got a rager planned for 4th of July weekend. This location is prime real estate for parties. James doesn't deserve this whole house," my mother declared firmly. "He's never here to appreciate it. Family property should benefit the entire family. He can either share willingly, or we'll make things very difficult for him." My hands shook as I silently photographed the floor plans and other evidence with my phone. In the back of a drawer, I found more disturbing items: parking space signs that had already been installed outside, copies of new keys, and a draft of the family property agreement Thomas had mentioned. The document was alarmingly comprehensive, outlining how each floor would be renovated to include separate entrances, how utilities would be divided, and most shockingly, a clause that prevented any sibling from selling their portion without offering first right of refusal to the others at below-market rates. It effectively would have locked me into their scheme permanently while devaluing my property. Another document detailed planned meetings with contractors, including one scheduled for tomorrow to discuss installing separate entrances and dividing the utilities. They had even contacted my building manager, pretending to act on my behalf, to inquire about permits for the renovations. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, my mind racing. Taking a few deep breaths to compose myself, I returned to the dining table with a neutral expression, determined not to show my hand. "Sorry about that," I said, reclaiming my seat. "Just had to check on something for work." "So, what do you think about our plan?" my mother asked, studying my face. "Isn't it sensible?" "I'm still processing," I replied carefully. "This is a big change. When were you thinking of implementing this arrangement?" My purposefully vague response opened the floodgates. Believing I was coming around to their scheme, my family eagerly shared more details of their plans. "We could start moving in next weekend," Thomas suggested. "The contractors are ready to begin work on separate entrances as soon as you give the go-ahead." "I've already measured for curtains in the kids' rooms," Amanda added excitedly. "And I've got a new sound system on order," Darren grinned. "Don't worry, I'll use headphones after 10. Their confidence was staggering. They'd planned every detail, assuming my compliance was inevitable. "I see," I nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I need some time to think this through. I'm leaving for a client meeting in Chicago tomorrow morning, so let's table this discussion until I return." The lie about Chicago came easily. I had no trip planned, but I needed them to believe I would be away while I worked on my counterattack. "Don't take too long deciding," my mother warned. "The contractors need an answer by Wednesday." "Of course," I assured her, standing up. "I should get going. Early flight tomorrow." As I gathered my things to leave, I caught Thomas slipping a set of what looked like new keys to Amanda. My sister quickly tucked them into her purse when she noticed my gaze. "Good night, everyone," I said pleasantly. "Thanks for dinner." Walking out to my car, I maintained my composure until I was safely inside with the doors locked. Only then did I allow the full weight of their betrayal to hit me. My own family had conspired to essentially steal my home from under me, rewriting my grandfather's wishes and dismissing my legal rights without a second thought. The shock gave way to resolve as I started the engine. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I hadn't built a successful career by allowing others to take advantage of me, and I certainly wouldn't start now, especially not with my grandfather's legacy at stake. Pulling away from the curb, I already had my phone connected to Bluetooth. Calling the one person I knew could help me shut this down immediately, my attorney, Michael Sullivan. "They did what?" Michael's voice filled my car as I drove away from the brownstone. After 8 years as my attorney, very little surprised him anymore, but this situation had managed it. "They're trying to divide my house into separate units without my permission," I repeated, still processing the audacity myself. "They've already made floor plans, contacted contractors, and drafted some kind of family property agreement. My brother actually expected me to sign it tonight." "Do you have a copy of this agreement?" Michael asked, professional mode engaging. "Not yet, but I have photos of it and the floor plans. They left them in my office, thinking I wouldn't find them. Send everything to me right away. This is a straightforward case of attempted property conversion. Your grandfather's will was explicit, and the deed is solely in your name. They have zero legal standing." I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot to send Michael the photos I'd taken. While waiting for them to upload, I made another call to Westbrook Property Management, which handled the building's administrative details during my frequent absences. "Mr. Harrison, we were just about to call you," said Diane, the property manager. "We've had some unusual requests from your family members recently." "What kind of requests?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your brother Thomas contacted us last week about the process for adding 3 new mailboxes to the building. And your mother called yesterday asking about the procedure for formally dividing the utilities into separate accounts. We explained that we'd need written authorization from you as the legal owner, but she seemed to think that wouldn't be a problem." "Thank you for following protocol," I said, making a mental note to send Diane a gift basket. "Under no circumstances should you authorize any changes without my explicit written consent, and I mean directly from me, not from anyone claiming to represent me. After ending that call, I contacted Boston's most reputable security company, requesting an emergency consultation at my hotel the following morning. My next call was to Peter Hamilton, a family therapist I'd seen briefly after my grandfather's death, who had helped me navigate family dynamics during the inheritance process. This level of entitlement suggests they've been nurturing these feelings for quite some time, Peter observed after I explained the situation. Your success, coupled with your absence, has likely created a narrative where they feel justified in taking what they see as their fair share of family assets. But it's not a family asset, I objected. The brownstone belongs solely to me. In legal terms, absolutely, Peter agreed. But in their minds, they've convinced themselves that your grandfather's decision was unfair or that your ownership is merely a technicality. Your mother appears to be the driving force, possibly viewing herself as the true family authority with the right to redistribute assets as she sees fit. By midnight, I had checked into a hotel downtown and transformed the suite into an impromptu war room. Michael arrived with his paralegal, armed with legal documents and a determined expression. I've pulled your grandfather's will, the property deed, and tax records, he said, spreading documents across the desk. Everything is ironclad. The property was transferred exclusively to you, with no conditions or encumbrances. What about my mother's claim that my grandfather was manipulated or not thinking clearly? I asked, recalling her words through the heating vent. We have sworn statements from his doctor confirming his mental competence at the time the will was executed, plus video recording of the will signing. Standard practice for estates of this value, Michael assured me. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. Over the next several hours, we developed a comprehensive strategy. A financial investigator on Michael's team discovered alarming information about my family's situations that explained their desperate grab for my property. Thomas had accumulated over $300,000 in debt through failed business ventures and gambling information he'd hidden from his wife. His home was indeed in pre-foreclosure, explaining his urgent need for a new residence and business space. Amanda and Kyle had already enrolled their children in the prestigious private school near my brownstone, despite having no ability to afford the tuition. They'd made a substantial non-refundable deposit, apparently counting on their imminent move to my address to secure financial aid based on the neighborhood's educational fund. Darren had been kicked out of his apartment for hosting destructive parties and owed thousands in damages. His academic probation meant he would lose his student housing next semester, explaining his sudden interest in claiming a floor of my home. Most disturbing was the discovery that my mother had been actively encouraging their entitlement, telling them for years that my grandfather's decision to leave me the brownstone was temporary, and that she always intended to correct this perceived injustice when the time was right. They've been planning this for at least 7 months, Michael's investigator reported, showing emails obtained through legal discovery. They timed it specifically for when your international travel picked up, believing you'd be too distracted to mount an effective defense. By dawn, our strategy was set. I would allow my family to believe I was out of town while actually preparing a decisive counterattack. Michael filed emergency injunctions preventing any modifications to the property and sent formal cease and desist letters to each family member. I arranged for a top security team to assess the brownstone and change all locks. The property management company was instructed to revoke any spare keys previously distributed to family members. Security cameras would be installed at all entrances. Most importantly, I scheduled a family meeting for Sunday, exactly 1 week after their ambush dinner, where I would confront them with legal representation present. The meeting would take place at the brownstone, where the evidence of their scheme remained scattered throughout my home. "Are you sure you want to do this so confrontationally?" Peter asked during our follow-up session. "These are permanent relationship-altering actions." "They altered the relationship when they plotted to take my home," I replied firmly. "I'm just responding accordingly." As the week progressed, I stayed at the hotel, allowing my family to believe I was in Chicago. Meanwhile, I worked with the security team to install state-of-the-art cameras throughout the brownstone, capturing footage of my siblings entering freely with their unauthorized keys, continuing to measure spaces, and even bringing in small furniture items when they thought no one was watching. The security company documented everything, creating a timeline of unauthorized entry and attempted property conversion that would prove invaluable in court if necessary. The locks were scheduled to be changed at midnight on Saturday, just hours before our Sunday confrontation. I also reached out to Judge Robert Caldwell, my grandfather's closest friend and mentor, who had helped him build his real estate portfolio decades ago. Though retired, his insight into my grandfather's intentions for the property would prove valuable if my mother tried to claim she knew better than the written will. "William was explicit about leaving you that brownstone," Judge Caldwell confirmed over lunch. "He saw himself in you, not just your interest in architecture, but your integrity. He told me, the others would sell it in a heartbeat, but James will preserve it. He'd be appalled by what they're attempting." By Saturday night, everything was in place. The dining room had been set up with legal documentation for each family member, clearly outlining their attempted property theft and the potential consequences. Security personnel would be positioned discreetly throughout the house. My legal team would arrive shortly before the meeting was scheduled to begin. I stood at the hotel window, looking out at the Boston skyline as dusk settled over the city. Tomorrow would permanently change my family relationships, but they had left me no choice. Some betrayals cut too deep for gentle responses. My phone chimed with a message from the security team. Locks changed successfully. New keys secured. All systems operational. It was time to take back my home. At precisely 8 o'clock Sunday morning, I returned to my brownstone. The security team met me at the entrance, providing a comprehensive briefing on the surveillance system, now covering every entry point. 24 high-definition cameras had been strategically placed throughout the property, their footage backing up to secure cloud storage that only I could access. "We've documented 17 unauthorized entries since Monday," the security chief, a former military intelligence officer named Steve, informed me. "Most frequent visitors were Thomas and Amanda, though your mother used her key twice and Darren once, bringing friends for what appeared to be a tour of the third floor." Steve handed me a tablet displaying multiple camera feeds. "You can monitor everything from here. The system will alert you to any attempted entry. All previous keys have been rendered useless with the new locks installed at midnight." I walked through each room of my home, cataloging evidence of my family's presumptuous invasion. In the main floor study, Thomas had left marketing materials for his latest business venture stacked neatly on my grandfather's antique desk. In one of the second-floor bedrooms, Amanda had hung color swatches on the wall and placed a child-sized bed frame against one wall. The entertainment room contained Darren's gaming equipment, partially set up and ready for use. "They really thought this was a done deal," I murmured to Steve, who followed discreetly behind me. "People convince themselves of what they want to believe," he replied with the weariness of someone who'd seen this scenario play out before. "In my experience, entitlement is one of the most powerful self-delusions." By 10 o'clock, my home had been transformed into a fortress of legal preparation. Michael and 2 associates from his firm arrived, bringing additional documentation and setting up in the dining room. Each place at the table contained a personalized folder with evidence specific to that family member's actions, legal consequences, and terms for moving forward. I positioned myself at the head of the table, my rightful place with Michael, seated to my right. The security team remained out of sight, but ready to intervene if necessary. At 11:30, I sent a group text to my family. "Emergency family meeting at the brownstone. 1 hour. Attendance mandatory." The responses came quickly. Thomas: "In a business meeting. Can we reschedule?" Amanda: "I thought you were in Chicago until Tuesday?" Darren: "Kinda hungover. Do I really need to be there?" My mother: "What's this about, James?" I replied to all, "This concerns the future of the brownstone. Everyone must attend. 1 hour, no exceptions." My phone immediately rang, my mother calling, no doubt to gauge my mood or try to control the situation. I declined the call and silenced my phone. Let them wonder. Let them worry. They had planned their ambush. Now I would execute mine. At precisely 12:30, the security camera at the front entrance showed my mother arriving first, her expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Steve met her at the door. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your key won't work anymore. The locks have been changed," he explained professionally. Mr. Harrison is expecting you in the dining room." Her indignation was clear, even on the silent video feed, as Steve escorted her inside. I watched her face change from irritation to concern when she entered the dining room and saw Michael and his associates in their impeccable suits, legal documents spread across the table. Thomas and Stephanie arrived 5 minutes later, followed closely by Amanda and Kyle. Darren showed up last, sunglasses hiding what were surely bloodshot eyes, his confused expression deepening when his key also failed to work. When all were assembled in the dining room, standing uncertainly behind their usual chairs, I nodded to Steve. He closed the double doors and positioned himself against the wall, a silent but unmistakable security presence. "Please, sit down," I said calmly, gesturing to the chairs. "We have much to discuss." "What's going on, James?" my mother demanded, remaining standing. "Why is your lawyer here? And who is this man?" She pointed at Steve. "Security," I replied simply. "Please sit down, Mother." Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because she slowly sank into a chair, the others following suit. "Last Sunday at dinner, you all presented me with a plan to divide my home among yourselves," I began, my voice steady. "Today, I'm presenting my response to that plan." I slid folders across the table to each family member. "Inside, you'll find documentation of your unauthorized entry into my home throughout the past week. You'll also find copies of my grandfather's will, property deed, and tax records, confirming my sole legal ownership of this property." Thomas flipped open his folder, his face paling as he saw photos of himself measuring the main floor study for furniture. "You've been spying on us?" Amanda gasped, looking up at the ceiling as if she might spot cameras. "No, I've been protecting my property from theft," I corrected her. "There's a significant difference." Michael cleared his throat and introduced himself formally. "I'm Michael Sullivan, Mr. Harrison's attorney. What you've attempted constitutes criminal trespass and attempted conversion of property. The documentation before you outlines the legal consequences should you continue these actions." "This is ridiculous," my mother interrupted. "We're family. Family shares." "Family also respects boundaries and legal ownership," I countered. "The brownstone belongs solely to me, by grandfather's explicit wish. Your plan to divide it was not only legally unenforceable but a profound betrayal of trust." I pressed a button on my tablet, and the large television screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying footage of Thomas leading contractors through the house on Tuesday, discussing partition walls and separate entrances. "You told these workers you had my authorization," I noted as Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's fraud." Another clip showed Amanda placing Ellie's room and Max's room signs on bedroom doors, telling her husband, "James will just have to accept it once it's done." Darren appeared next, bringing friends through the entertainment room, boasting, "This'll be party central by July. My brother's never here anyway." With each new clip, my family's expressions shifted from defiance to embarrassment to fear as they realized the extent of the evidence against them. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said after the footage ended. "This property is mine. There will be no division of floors, no separate entrances, no unauthorized occupancy. All keys previously distributed have been rendered useless by new locks installed at midnight last night. Any attempt to enter without my explicit permission will be treated as breaking and entering, with all applicable legal consequences." The silence that followed was deafening. "You can't be serious." Thomas finally broke the silence, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're your family." "Family doesn't conspire to steal property," I replied evenly. "Family doesn't lie, manipulate, or make plans to override someone's legal rights." "We weren't stealing," my mother protested. "We were making better use of space that sits empty most of the year. Your grandfather would have wanted the house to benefit everyone." "Interesting theory," I said, nodding to Michael, who produced a sealed envelope. I took the liberty of asking Judge Caldwell to provide a sworn statement regarding my grandfather's intentions for this property. At the mention of Judge Caldwell, my mother's face drained of color. She had always been slightly intimidated by my grandfather's closest friend, whose moral integrity was legendary in Boston legal circles. Michael read from the document. William Harrison explicitly intended the Beacon Hill brownstone to pass solely to his grandson James, whom he considered the only family member who would preserve its historical integrity and appreciate its architectural significance. He expressed concerns to me that other family members viewed the property purely in terms of its monetary value and would likely sell it or significantly alter its character if given the opportunity. "Robert Caldwell doesn't know everything," William thought, my mother said weakly. "He knows what's in the will, which is legally binding," Michael responded. "And the will is unambiguous." I turned to Thomas, whose hands were visibly shaking as he flipped through the documents in his folder. "You're in pre-foreclosure on your current home. You have gambling debts exceeding $300,000 that you've hidden from Stephanie. Is that why you need my property? To solve financial problems of your own making?" Stephanie's head snapped toward her husband. "What gambling debts? Thomas, what is he talking about?" Thomas seemed to collapse inward, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "I can explain," he began, but the words died as Stephanie's expression hardened into disbelief. I shifted my attention to Amanda and Kyle. "You've already enrolled your children in Cambridge Day Academy, using this address to qualify for neighborhood scholarships. You paid the non-refundable deposit before ever discussing your plans to move here with me." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "The kids deserve a good education. We can't afford it otherwise." "That doesn't entitle you to my property," I pointed out. "There are other solutions to your housing and education needs that don't involve taking what isn't yours." Darren slouched in his chair, trying to appear nonchalant despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Look, it was just an idea. No harm in asking, right?" "You didn't ask," I reminded him. "You announced. You planned. You began moving in. And you promised your friends' parties in my home without my knowledge or consent." My mother attempted to regain control of the situation. "James, surely we can discuss this reasonably. The house is far too big for one person. Your grandfather wouldn't want to see it sitting empty while family members struggle." "That's where you're wrong," I said firmly. "Grandfather knew exactly what he was doing. He built his legacy through hard work and smart choices, not by taking from others or feeling entitled to what wasn't his." I opened another folder and slid documents across the table to my mother. "These are emails you sent to Thomas, Amanda, and Darren over the past 7 months, planning how to reclaim the brownstone. You referred to my inheritance as temporary and assured them you would correct Grandpa's mistake when the time was right." Her face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. "How dare you access my private communications? They were obtained legally through discovery once you involved yourself in a conspiracy to deprive me of my property," Michael interjected smoothly. "The court issued the subpoenas on Wednesday." The atmosphere in the room shifted as my family began to realize the seriousness of their situation. This wasn't a family disagreement that could be smoothed over with apologies and promises to do better. There were potential legal consequences looming over them. "What do you want from us?" Thomas asked, his entrepreneurial mind already seeking the path of least resistance. "First, I want all items you've moved into my home removed by the end of today," I stated clearly. "Second, I want written acknowledgement from each of you that the brownstone belongs solely to me and that you have no claim to it now or in the future." I gestured to the papers in their folders. "Michael has prepared these statements. They're straightforward declarations recognizing my ownership and your agreement not to challenge it. Sign them, remove your belongings, and we can begin to move forward." "And if we don't sign?" my mother challenged, a final attempt at resistance. Michael answered before I could. "Then we proceed with legal action for criminal trespass, attempted conversion of property, conspiracy, and fraud." Given the documented evidence, it would be an open and shut case with potential consequences, including significant fines and possibly jail time for the more serious offenses. Thomas was the first to break. "I'll sign," he said quietly, reaching for a pen. Stephanie stared at him in shock, clearly processing the revelation about their financial situation. Amanda and Kyle exchanged glances before Amanda nodded reluctantly. "We'll sign too. The kids will be disappointed, but..." Her voice trailed off. Darren shrugged. "Whatever. It's just a house." My mother remained defiant the longest, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Finally, she snatched up the pen. "You've changed, James. Your grandfather would be disappointed in how you've treated your family today." "Actually," I replied calmly, as she scrawled her signature, "I think he'd be proud that I stood up for myself and protected what he entrusted to me." He valued integrity above all else. As they signed the documents, Steve coordinated with additional security personnel who had arrived to supervise the removal of their unauthorized belongings. Each item was photographed before being returned to its owner, creating a record in case of any future disputes. "Your access to the brownstone will now be by invitation only," I informed them as the signed papers were collected and notarized on the spot by one of Michael's associates. "The security system will remain in place indefinitely." Thomas paused at the dining room door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Things got out of hand with the gambling, and I panicked." "Get help, Thomas," I told him sincerely. "For your sake and Stephanie's." Amanda couldn't meet my eyes as she gathered her children's room signs and color swatches. "We just wanted a better life for the kids. There are other ways," I assured her. "Ways that don't involve taking what belongs to someone else." Darren seemed the least affected, though I suspected his nonchalance was largely an act. "Nice security system," he commented on his way out. "Very big brother. Very necessary, apparently," I countered. My mother was the last to leave, pausing in the foyer to deliver what she clearly thought would be a parting blow. "Your father would have never allowed this division in the family. You created the division when you orchestrated this plan," I reminded her. "I'm just establishing boundaries that should have existed all along." As the front door closed behind them, I watched through the security cameras as they gathered on the sidewalk, arguing among themselves. Thomas and Stephanie headed for their car first, her body language clearly indicating the serious conversation awaiting him at home. Amanda and Kyle followed shortly after, walking in strained silence. Darren peeled away to join friends waiting down the street, apparently eager to escape the family drama. My mother remained the longest, staring up at the brownstone with an expression I couldn't quite decipher: anger, certainly, but perhaps also a dawning realization of what her actions had cost her. At precisely midnight, I watched on the security feed as the locksmith arrived to change the final locks on the service entrance, the last access point to be secured. As he worked, I stood in my grandfather's study, now truly my own, feeling a complex mixture of sadness for what had been lost and resolve for what lay ahead. The relationships might never be the same, but my home was once again secure. More importantly, I had honored my grandfather's trust by protecting his legacy from those who failed to respect his wishes. The months following the confrontation were unusually quiet. The family text chain fell silent. Sunday dinners ceased. Holiday plans remained unconfirmed as November approached. The distance wasn't what I'd wanted, but it was necessary for healing both theirs and mine. "Family estrangement often feels like failure," Peter explained during one of our regular sessions. "But sometimes it's the only healthy option when boundaries are repeatedly violated." I'd continued seeing Peter weekly, working through the complex emotions that surfaced after standing my ground. Betrayal by family cuts deeper than any other kind, leaving wounds that require intentional care. "I keep wondering if I could have handled it differently," I admitted during one session, gazing out Peter's office window at the Boston skyline. "Less confrontationally, perhaps." "You responded proportionally to their actions," Peter reminded me. "They didn't approach you with a polite request. They orchestrated an ambush, made arrangements behind your back, and began moving in without permission. Your response needed to be decisive enough to establish clear boundaries. Rebuilding my sense of safety within my own home took time. Though the security system provided physical protection, emotional security was harder to restore. I found myself checking the camera feeds regularly, half expecting to see family members attempting to regain entry. "That's normal," Steve assured me during a security system review 3 months after installation. "The sense of violation lingers long after the threat is contained. Give it time." Gradually, I reclaimed my space. I renovated the entertainment room that Darren had earmarked for his ultimate bachelor pad, transforming it into a design studio where I could work on local projects without traveling to my firm's office downtown. The bedrooms Amanda had designated for her children became guest rooms for colleagues visiting from overseas. Most significantly, I converted the main floor study the room Thomas had planned to use for business meetings into a memorial space for my grandfather. His architectural drawings were professionally framed and displayed alongside photos documenting his career. His collection of rare books on historical Boston architecture found a home in custom-built shelves. While working on this space, I rediscovered a letter my grandfather had left with his will, sharing his hopes for the brownstone's future. His words validated my actions in ways nothing else could. This home represents not just my work but my values. I entrust it to you, James, knowing you'll honor both. Never let others diminish what you've earned through integrity and hard work. 6 months after the confrontation, unexpected healing began. Thomas reached out first, asking to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. He arrived looking healthier than I'd seen him in years. "I'm 6 months clean from gambling," he said without preamble. "After everything imploded, I finally got help. The therapist said I should make amends where possible." "I'm glad you're getting help," I told him sincerely. "What you did that day, as much as I hated it then, was probably the best thing that could have happened," he admitted. "It forced me to face reality instead of chasing another quick fix." Thomas and Stephanie had downsized to a modest apartment while rebuilding their finances. He'd found steady work managing a legitimate business rather than chasing entrepreneurial fantasies, and was slowly repaying his debts. "Stephanie almost left," he confessed, "finding out about the gambling debts that way. I don't blame her for being furious, but we're working through it in couples therapy." Amanda reached out next, through a handwritten letter that arrived nearly 7 months after our confrontation. She apologized for her role in the scheme and explained that she and Kyle had reassessed their priorities. "We wanted the kids to have everything we didn't," she wrote. "But in pursuing that, we were teaching them the wrong lessons about entitlement and respect for others' boundaries. We've enrolled them in a good public school near our apartment and started family counseling. When we eventually met for coffee, she seemed more at peace than I'd seen her in years. Kyle and I realized we were projecting our insecurities onto the children. They don't need individual bedrooms in a fancy neighborhood to thrive. They need parents who model integrity and contentment." Darren's return to the family fold came after he finally graduated legitimately this time and secured an entry-level position that required actual responsibility. The structure and accountability seemed to be exactly what he needed. "Getting kicked out of my apartment after that party was a wake-up call," he told me when we eventually reconnected. "I realized I couldn't keep coasting on charm and other people's generosity forever." Our mother took longest to come around, her pride creating the highest barrier to reconciliation. When she finally called, nearly a year had passed. "I still think that house should have been shared," she said stubbornly, "but I was wrong about how we approached it. Your grandfather left it to you, and that was his right." It wasn't a perfect apology, but from her, it was significant progress. We met for lunch the following week, navigating a new, more respectful relationship with careful conversation and acknowledgement of past mistakes. The most meaningful development came when I decided to use my home in a way that would have made my grandfather truly proud. I established a mentoring program for architectural students from disadvantaged backgrounds, hosting monthly workshops in the brownstone, where aspiring architects could learn about historical preservation and urban design. Your grandfather believed architecture should serve communities, not just wealthy clients. Judge Caldwell reminded me when I shared my plans. This program honors that belief perfectly. The first workshop filled the brownstone with eager students, whose passion reminded me of my own early days following my grandfather around construction sites. Watching them examine the original woodwork and hand-carved moldings with reverence, I felt my grandfather's legacy continuing in ways more meaningful than mere ownership. Gradually, new Sunday gatherings replaced the old tradition, not family dinners fraught with hidden agendas, but open houses for students, colleagues, and friends who appreciated the brownstone for what it was, rather than what they could take from it. My family eventually began attending these gatherings, not as entitled occupants, but as welcome guests. Thomas brought his business expertise to students interested in the financial aspects of architecture. Amanda organized children's architecture workshops during school breaks. Even Darren contributed, using his social media skills to document the program's growth. The healing wasn't perfect or complete. Real healing rarely is, but it was genuine, built on new foundations of mutual respect rather than obligation or entitlement. The most important lesson I learned through this ordeal wasn't about property rights or legal protections, though those certainly mattered. It was about the courage to establish boundaries even with those closest to you, especially when those boundaries protect something valuable, whether that's a physical space, a principle, or your own sense of self-worth. I often think about what might have happened had I capitulated that Sunday evening, allowing my family's sense of entitlement to override my grandfather's wishes and my own rights. The brownstone would have been irreparably altered, but more importantly, I would have established a pattern of allowing others to take what was mine simply because they wanted it. Instead, by standing firm, I not only preserved my grandfather's legacy, but created space for authentic healing and growth for myself and, ultimately, for my family as well. Have you ever had to defend something that rightfully belonged to you from people who felt entitled to it? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about standing up for yourself and setting healthy boundaries. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to clearly define and defend what's yours. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps someone who might be facing similar challenges.